The profound Dharma is rarely met in countless eons. Now we can see, hear, and uphold it. May we understand the true meaning of the Tathagata. In order to liberate all sentient beings, let us all give rise to the unsurpassed bodhicitta. Today, we will continue with our discussion regarding the sacred text known as the Udāna Sūtra, but today I'm actually having a bit of a headache, and I think it's probably from being out in the wind. So my talk, which to be honest is usually not considered to be all that great, I'm afraid that there's a chance it might actually be even worse this time around. If we were to grade it, I might not even pass the oral Dharma examination at all. Well, let's get back to the main topic. Let's continue studying the sacred Udāna Sūtra in more detail below. It is also commonly referred to as the Self-Spoken Sutra, or alternatively, as the Self-Spoken Chapter. Currently, among the total of 33 chapters of this profound scripture, we have now arrived at the fourth chapter of our discussion, which is titled The Chapter on Vigilance. And as we begin to explore the contents of this particular chapter on vigilance, those without merit naturally tend toward evil paths. Their joy is always fleeting and inevitably filled with fear. They get in trouble with the law and face harsh punishment from the ruler. Their bodies get destroyed, and they end up in hell. This verse, when taken together with the previous one, is also connected to form a single, cohesive whole. It serves to further elaborate in greater detail on the meaning that has already been discussed. For those individuals who are negligent in their conduct, if they become inappropriately close to another's wife, they will incur 4 major faults. The first of these is the loss of one's accumulated merit, and another is being plagued by restless sleep. Additionally, they will attract all kinds of harmful slander from others, and finally, after their death, they are said to fall into hell. As for this principle, as we also briefly explained to everyone in our last class session, it is important to recognize that, from a general perspective, there are a great many instances of these kinds of behaviors that are currently taking place all around the world. In fact, this should be understood as a deeply and fundamentally immoral type of action. In other words, each and every one of the following issues mentioned above is further explained and thoroughly elaborated upon in much greater detail. This emphasizes the profound seriousness of this guiding principle. The first major consequence is the loss of one's accumulated merit. This is because it is taught that those who commit sexual misconduct will unfortunately lose all the merit they have previously accumulated. Generally speaking, if an individual is lacking in sufficient merit, they will inevitably fall into the 3 lower realms of existence, namely hell, hungry ghosts, and animals. Because a person without merit will also commit various kinds of negative karma in daily life. Not only do they engage in sexual misconduct, they may also go on to commit other more serious crimes, such as killing and stealing. If an individual has taken vows but then fails to maintain proper caution and becomes careless in their conduct, they will inevitably end up committing even more harmful actions. This brings to mind the common saying that people who appear pitiful often have aspects of their character that are, in fact, also blameworthy. They may end up creating even more negative karma. As a result, it is said their next life will most certainly fall into the lower realms. This serves as a further explanation for the loss of one's merit. Secondly, they will experience a profound lack of peaceful sleep. This is especially true for those individuals who commit sexual misconduct and live carelessly. In reality, these individuals often find themselves living in a state of almost constant fear. They carry the persistent worry of being discovered by those around them and are also deeply afraid of being attacked by others, whether that attack is verbal, physical, or even emotional. The kind of happiness they observe others sharing with one another is not necessarily something that they themselves are able to obtain, and even on the rare occasions when they do manage to obtain it, that feeling is fleeting. The pleasure they are able to experience is also, by comparison, extremely insignificant. As a result, they find they have no genuine sense of security or lasting happiness in their lives. Even if some semblance of it does appear, it is so extremely slight and fleeting that it is essentially meaningless. Third, they also have to deal with attracting slander and defamation from many people. Because in this world, if a person's actions are not truly considered to be entirely pure, they will inevitably attract all manner of criticism from a great number of people, for instance, things like slander, defamation, and so on. In such situations, they gradually begin to violate the established laws set forth by the king, and then the king also becomes angry. Now, regarding the previous case, this primarily refers to the severe punishment administered by King Prasenajit during that era. The punishment involved the brutal act of having the individual's hands and feet cut off. Following this, the person was also taken to the official execution ground to face capital punishment. Therefore, this individual was subjected to the full and harsh extent of the king's punishment. Individuals who engage in acts of sexual misconduct will receive a particularly severe punishment, and as a result, they will also be unable to attain true happiness. Fourth, the continuity of his physical body in this lifetime will be completely destroyed. After being destroyed, it's like a fish placed in a hot skillet, or find themselves submerged in boiling water. They will be condemned to suffer greatly in hell, where they are destined to endure the most extreme and agonizing pain. Therefore, this case is primarily told as a cautionary story from that time. Of course, in this day and age, some people, primarily because of the widely prevailing social morals, are completely different from the past. In addition, the specific laws and regulations of each and every individual country are also different. In some places, this is heavily punished, while in others, not only is it not punished. Believe it or not, some people actually find this subject quite interesting. For instance, in today's society, we see numerous cases of infidelity and other similar situations. It's not just that these actions are not considered to be particularly bad, but on the contrary, a great number of people in a wide variety of different situations have come to view it as something that is genuinely meaningful. If that's the case, does it mean that what the Buddha said wasn't so precise? Is there any doubt like this? Actually, it's not really an issue, because even in the original teachings of Confucius and Mencius, in some of their very specific instructions, when they are combined with our own present era, a full 2,500 years later, if you were to put them all together, some of the finer aspects don't quite match up. But in actual fact, at that particular point in time, there was a certain social and historical context. So there's really nothing all that unreasonable about it whatsoever. Of course, it's indeed true that even up to now, it's also in terms of people's moral concepts. This is a kind of fundamental principle that absolutely everyone should make a special effort to recognize. This is particularly true for most people who are upstanding individuals and already understand the established rules, would not consider it to be something particularly meaningful. And in fact, relying on it is known to bring about a wide variety of significant issues, including considerable health problems and many other aspects of a person's life. Especially nowadays, such behavior, when it is not in accordance with the rules, and this in turn leads to a whole host of serious diseases. And it should be noted, these diseases are actually very serious indeed, including, for example, AIDS. These specific phenomena are also becoming increasingly more severe in our current times. It was just the other day, in fact, that I was speaking with someone who I know from back in my old hometown. It was reported that both the husband and wife had contracted AIDS. The two of them have 2 children with them, and it was said that one of the girls had also contracted it. So, in this family of 4, it's a tragic situation where 3 people have already contracted the AIDS virus. The husband then said there might be some other things to consider as well, but he was quite reserved and didn't really say much about it. They mentioned that they were having some difficulties with the cost of medication and other related expenses. So it's important to recognize that for diseases like these, such factors mentioned above can also be a significant contributing factor. Not too long ago, there was a particular news report that was saying that there was a girl about 19 years old who, after contracting acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS, deliberately went on to infect 324 people. This all occurred within a very short period, as she actively spread the disease to others. a 19-year-old girl. Some of these people harbor resentment towards society. Her behavior was not in accordance with the law or morality, and she contracted such a disease. They are dissatisfied with society as a whole. If everyone around them is living healthy lives, they just can't accept it in their hearts. So they very deliberately and methodically use a wide variety of different methods to begin spreading this specific and harmful disease. Consequently, when looking at our current society purely on the surface level, it certainly seems as if there aren't any particularly large or significant problems to be found. On the surface, everything appears to be calm and peaceful, but in reality, at every level of society, the situation is actually indeed very serious. The other day, in front of a teacher who specializes in AIDS prevention, another Han Chinese person asked, he said regarding the topic of AIDS, does it actually exist in my hometown or not? A scholar from Qinghai then asked him, which township is your hometown? It turned out, wow, yes, there are a lot there. He was very surprised. How could even my hometown have this? Later, it was said that nowadays, almost every village has many cases, some of which are public, while others are not disclosed. Therefore, the source of these cases is often actually related to promiscuity or other forms of immoral behavior to a certain extent. And here it also goes on to elaborate on these 4 distinct categories of faults. According to these faults, it is also possible for one to be slandered within this very life. Especially now, with the prevalence of AIDS, universities and high schools are the hardest hit areas. The matter is indeed extremely serious. It's simply that in certain places it has not been fully revealed yet. Whether this is in hospitals or among the various different individuals who are working on AIDS prevention, from all the information that they reveal, this disease has become a very serious problem in universities nowadays. So phenomena such as these, even back in the time of the Buddha, he repeatedly and clearly spoke about their inherent faults, and even in the present day, they continue to bring a great deal of trouble. Not only are they unhealthy for one's own body and mind, but they also affect those around you. Of course, in the next life, there is only one destination for such a person, which is among the 3 lower realms. So, the profound meanings and doctrines the Buddha spoke of also contain many deeper truths that are not immediately apparent. Actually, whether it's the sutras or the treatises, when we look at them on the surface, they seem to be just seemingly very ordinary words, but behind these words there are in fact also hidden various aspects of culture and many profound religious teachings, including important subjects like morality and history as well. A truly wise person is able to perceive that there are deeper meanings behind the words. This is extremely important. If we only interpret them literally, to put it in a very simple way, then every verse might seem dry and dull. And in all honesty, there would not be a great deal left to say about it, simply those 4 lines. Other than that, it seems there's nothing more to explain. But if we take the time to study this more carefully, or dig a little deeper, there is actually a great deal of content to be found within. This includes the present Udāna Sūtra, which, on the surface, seems to be just a verse of 4 lines each. But in fact, behind it is also hidden. If we examine the historical context and the specific cases from the era when Shakyamuni Buddha was alive, and then consider how we can apply these insights to the situations we face in our modern world today, we can in fact still use it today. The language is essentially just this one language. But it can be used to explain all kinds of social phenomena. For example, as a politician, one can certainly interpret it from a political perspective. As a business entrepreneur, one might also consider using their own business management and business philosophy to interpret it. As a practitioner, if I am in retreat every day, practicing in the mountains, I can also apply this phrase to myself. So the meaning of the Buddhist scriptures, as Mipham Rinpoche said, they have outer, inner, and secret meanings. Furthermore, it also contains a whole range of subsidiary and related meanings deep within its very structure.
Quand j'étais tanto pas din comment vient de chat, si puissant ta gingervé,
For those individuals who are genuinely seeking their own lasting happiness, it is important to act in the manner that has been described above. Much like a person riding in a carriage must remain focused and attentive, the steadfast are always characterized by their consistent diligence. To provide some context, it is mentioned that on one occasion in the past, the Buddha was residing within a forest named Saketa Aranya. At that particular time, the compassionate Buddha was personally leading a group of his monks, and they went into the city to beg for alms. While they were begging, they saw a man who was sitting inside a traditional horse-drawn carriage. For some reason, this man did not follow the clearly established proper path, and because of this decision, he eventually went completely astray. He had decided to take a different path, which caused him to stray far from the main road, and after going significantly off course, he was lost. Perhaps it was because the road wasn't in very good condition, and for that reason the carriage broke down. The main axle and the wheels were both damaged. After it completely broke down, the man had absolutely no way to continue moving forward, so he couldn't drive any further. He remained right there, feeling especially sad and also deeply regretful. At this point, the Buddha himself, in response to this very story, he proceeded to speak the following 3 verses. Now, the first verse explains that there was a particular carriage driver who, for some reason, did not ultimately succeed at that specific time. This event took place back in 1986. His Holiness traveled to the Ganzi and Luhuo areas. During that particular time, Khenpo Sodargye Lodro drove a tractor at that time, specifically an Eastern brand tractor. And among the many people who had gathered to see us off, there was someone from Daofu named Awang. He had a jeep, but the jeep was rather old and worn out. Once when we were positioned somewhere near the vast mountains by Ganzi, right at that very spot, he stopped the car there. At that time, Khenpo wasn't like he is now. He was also quite mischievous. He immediately got inside and tried to drive up, but when he tried to drive, the car wouldn't move. He told us to quickly put stones under the wheels. Put stones. So we kept putting stones one after another. Then little by little, finally, he managed to get it going. Once the car was moving, he just drove straight up. After that, we walked behind in order to catch up. As a result, on that road, he drove up along the winding path. When he reached the top of the mountain, he drove the car right into the deep ditch that was there by the side of the road. We could see him from a considerable distance, and then he got out of the car and took off his robe. You have to remember, back in those days, those jeeps had something like an engine crank at the front. He was right there, cranking it with all of his might and strength. So we went over to take a look, and thankfully the car hadn't flipped over. It had just gone into the ditch on the side of the road. Many of us lamas had gone together with His Holiness at that time, so we all put in our effort and pulled the car back onto the road. After we finally got it back on the road, Awang came over, looking visibly unhappy, and he said, "You monks always seem to think you can do anything. What are you doing? You very nearly broke my car." He actually had quite a few stories very much like this. Once when he drove to Suoto, sacred mountain again, his car was prone to breaking down, and after driving for just a little while, he had to stop and pour some more water into it again. We all joked about it and said, "His car needs to drink water again, it needs water again." Sometimes when we stopped briefly along the road, he would then ask us monks to get out and help him push the car. This happened quite often. Back in those days, things were not at all the same as they are today. I don't know what I was just thinking about. What I mean is, at that time our car's wheels weren't broken, but this person's car wheels were broken. Maybe it was the axle, the car's axle, the long connecting rod that is found between the 2 wheels, almost like a stick. Maybe that was broken too. So at that time, because of this reason, these 3 verses were spoken. If we explain it literally, first of all, it talks about the individuals who are seeking their own personal happiness. It was last year during class that Khenpo Sodargye Lodro made a joke at my expense, pointing out that my clothes were old and ragged. So today, I'm finally going to fight back. You might imagine a scene where I'm wearing ragged clothes and he's driving a beat-up car, but of course I'm just kidding about all that. The reality is, back in those days, he at least knew how to drive. As for me, I have never actually driven a car, and I still don't even know how to drive. those who seek their own happiness, people who are negligent, who seek without wisdom, those who spend all day thinking about how to make themselves happy. You should, as was mentioned before, practice with diligent and consistently non-negligent behavior if you genuinely want to attain a lasting sense of happiness for yourself. If you want happiness in this life and in future lives, and also want to gain wealth and so on in this life, happiness in all aspects. Therefore, in this particular case, we certainly must follow the important teachings that have been mentioned above and act according to the instructions on diligence. That's how it should be, otherwise it wouldn't make sense. To provide an example, let's consider someone who is rather foolish, as I just mentioned. This individual is a merchant who is in the process of transporting his commercial goods, and he is doing so by driving a vehicle from one location to another. And if the person driving the car takes the wrong road or heads in an incorrect direction, the outcome is that the car will eventually end up in a deep ravine. This situation is extremely dangerous. The vehicle could be destroyed, which is a very significant risk. For this reason, it is important that we take the right path. You could certainly phrase the importance of this principle that way as well. Or, as another example, if an individual is driving a truck to transport goods for their business, in that situation, if they are the one driving, he will be sure to drive very carefully while staying on the proper road, and he will make certain to take the actual highway, so there won't be any significant danger involved. In fact, you could say that life itself is very much like traveling on a long road. The journey of life is like being a driver, too. You drive your own car. This is also an understandable analogy. Such a steadfast person, an individual who is determined to fight against the inner demons of their afflictions, must be exceptionally diligent and persistent in their efforts. You cannot allow these laziness and negligence to ruin your precious life in any way. What is mainly being discussed here is, as mentioned earlier, for those who seek happiness for themselves alone, if even they need to be so careful and cautious, then it's even more so for those who seek to benefit others. When it comes to the matter of benefiting others, their undertaking is truly extremely vast. So it's even more important to be attentive and mindful, not negligent, and to always proceed with great caution. Whether we are doing things for ourselves or doing things for others, we must always be extremely careful and not negligent. This is truly and extremely important. Just a few years ago, we talked about the classic of filial piety. Within the classic of filial piety, it is noted that there is a quotation from the Book of Songs. So what does the Book of Songs say? It says, "Trembling with great fear, as if standing at the very edge of a deep abyss, as if treading on thin, fragile ice." What does this mean? It means that at every moment, we must be especially vigilant and attentive. Just like when someone is at the edge of a deep abyss or a cliff, they are extremely careful. When walking along a steep mountainside, if I'm not careful, it's very easy to fall down. It's very easy to fall into a bottomless abyss. So we have to be extremely cautious. Or if we find ourselves on a particularly thin layer of ice with a very deep lake underneath, when we walk on the ice, we are going to be extremely, and I mean extremely careful with every single step that we take, because the ice is also very thin. I think some of the metaphors used by the ancients are really interesting. If we are walking beside a cliff, we will definitely walk very carefully. If we are walking on thin ice, we will also walk with extreme caution. The same principle applies. Even ordinary people in the world, based on Confucian knowledge, they are also extremely cautious. Especially the ancients, those with wisdom in this world. Not everything is something you can do just because you want to, say just because you want to, or run just because you want to. In reality, the situation is not quite like that. People have their own guiding principles. They possess strong self-control and maintain a degree of personal restraint in their behavior. Therefore, this same logic applies to the practice of Buddhism, where it is essential to cultivate this kind of proper conduct. Only by doing so can one accomplish things that are genuinely meaningful. For example, during the Tang Dynasty, there was a very famous and capable man named Di Renji, who was also a prime minister, very famous. He once went to visit a very old and wise monk in a remote temple. In fact, it seems that whenever I mention the great Di Renji, many of you, judging by your expressions, have seen You might have seen some of the movies they've made about him. There are quite a lot of those, right? But it's crucial to understand that what is frequently shown in these popular movies and television dramas isn't always that true to the actual historical events or the person's real life. In the past, he had received some teachings from an old monk. He was given some instructions. Later, when he was on his way to take the imperial exam, he encountered a woman whose husband had very recently passed away. Just as he was on the verge of engaging in some improper and dishonorable behavior with her, he had a critical moment of self-realization, telling himself that it was essential to control his own desires. She asked him why. He said, "Because I once met an old monk. This person taught me the important lesson that in certain special, challenging situations, one must understand how to properly contemplate the nature of impurity. For example, imagining decay or a bluish-black corpse, and other similar kinds of thoughts." And so it was at that particular moment he told her about the old monk's teachings. Sometime later, the woman also began to engage in this specific practice of contemplation, and after she had finally finished with it, Direnji eventually rose to the position of Prime Minister and was widely known for acting with great integrity. He also became a very famous and highly respected figure in Chinese history. And the woman was successfully able to preserve her own chastity as well. You see, the people of ancient times paid a great deal of attention to these very important matters. And so it is said that during one of the old monk's teachings, those who are wise, even with a very simple practice that he had personally provided for them, a straightforward method intended to counteract desire, ultimately, when all was said and done, not a single one of them actually fell into a series of very impure and controversial actions. Ultimately, he himself successfully became the Prime Minister, and the woman involved also officially received high praise from the imperial court. This was, all in all, a very meaningful and significant event in the nation's history. So then, for some of us who may, as it were, have relatively good roots of virtue, even a single verse, it could be the profound wisdom imparted during a teacher's lesson, or sometimes it might just be a single, simple word that finds its way deep into our hearts, causing us to pause, reflect, and contemplate its true meaning. After doing this, it can play a very significant and foundational role in overcoming our many afflictions. In actual fact, having a solid theory is also very important for us. Without theory, it really doesn't work. But for any principle within the theory, we have to see whether this so-called Dharma can truly merge with our hearts. This is the most crucial point. If the Dharma does not merge with your heart, no matter how well we speak about it on the surface, in reality it doesn't truly have any real significance for your own mental continuum. So during the process of listening and contemplating, we should learn to utilize every single teaching in order to counteract our own personal habitual patterns. In the past, I have taught the Abhidharmakosha, and in this lifetime, I have actually only served as a Dharma tutor on one single occasion, tutoring on the great commentary of the Abhidharmakosha and also on Jamyang Lodro Wangpo's commentary. I combined them in my teachings. But when I was teaching, on one hand, the Abhidharmakosha is very dry and tedious, as everyone knows. There are so many technical terms, classifications, definitions, and explanations in it. There are just so many of them. But if for each teaching you basically relate every verse to your own mental continuum, it actually becomes quite interesting. So for us, we should learn to integrate every teaching into our own hearts. At that point, once the Dharma truly merges with your heart, I believe that nothing else can stand in your way. Whether it's adverse conditions or suffering, everything becomes very important to you. But if the Dharma hasn't merged with your heart, you don't even need adverse conditions. You'll naturally stray from this path on your own. There's a huge difference between the two. That's why when it comes to study and contemplation, the great masters of the past perhaps weren't as broadly learned as some people are today. They were not necessarily possessing vast encyclopedic knowledge or being extremely erudite, nor did they have every single scripture and treatise readily available at their fingertips. They simply didn't have that, but in fact, especially some practitioners in the past, in theory, they may not have mastered any of the 5 great treatises, but the Dharma they practiced and attained was completely integrated into their hearts. In the end, over the course of their lives, they became truly successful practitioners. So, for a great many people, especially when they are young, the single most crucial thing is we can't just skim the surface of the words. If we only stay at the level of the words, Anyone can train their tongue to recite them. Even animals nowadays. Take parrots, for example. So if we properly train and teach them, whether it's something like singing or dancing or even learning to speak a language, for example, English, Chinese, or whatever it may be, then basically they can absolutely learn to imitate humans. But for their own mental continuum, it doesn't really have much inherent meaning. And that's why it's called parroting, because it's essentially meaningless. So in this context, I think that every single verse actually has a more profound meaning behind it. What we have just covered was the content of the first verse. Now let's proceed to the second verse. As you'll recall, we mentioned earlier that this case involves a total of 3 verses, correct?
Lam tagdan roshe be mugchag sim kung chitbartar mugchag
has a number of different layers of meaning. But in the end, when he actually explains it in the commentary, the meaning is that it refers to a broken tire or perhaps a broken axle. He explains mug in this way. Perhaps this interpretation is a bit better in terms of meaning. For instance, it is like a foolish rides a cart and then proceeds to abandon the great good road. He turns onto a treacherous path, and when the wheel breaks, his heart is overcome with remorse. This specific koan should be... It seems that the Chuyao Jing, Udāna Varga, also contains a similar koan. It tells of a group of people and 10 merchants who went together to the sea to seek treasures. While seeking treasures, during the journey on the way back, there was one particular merchant who was perhaps far greedier than any of the others. He successfully obtained a great many valuable and precious treasures and then piled them all, one after another, high into his cart while traveling with the rest of the caravan. In the end, he fell behind. After falling behind, he desperately tried to find a possible way out. He was also afraid of bandits and such things. So, in an effort to save time, he chose what he thought was a shorter route. As a result, he unfortunately ended up driving his vehicle into a deep ravine. There, both the wheels and the axle of his cart broke. After they broke, he couldn't go any further. He was in truly great pain and immense distress. He kept trying to find some way to escape his predicament and desperately sought help from anyone he could. But there was nothing he could do. In today's terms, you could say he was in a place with no signal at all. At this very moment, the Buddha then saw clearly with his divine eye that the time and conditions for his liberation had matured. And so the Buddha then manifested before him, taking the form of a truly magnificent celestial being who was seated serenely, seemingly floating in the empty space directly in his path. Upon witnessing this incredible sight, the man immediately began to pray fervently to the heavens, the gods, desperately asking if there was any possible way that his broken-down cart could be miraculously fixed. At this point, the celestial being used his supernatural powers to bring him to the outside of Jetavana monastery. Then the celestial being simply disappeared, because after all, it was in fact the Buddha himself. The Buddha then went on to tell the monks inside. The monks eventually agreed to let the man who was waiting outside come into the monastery. After they had let him in, the monks then proceeded to bring in the man and the cart he had with him from earlier. Only the man himself was actually allowed to enter, not his cart. After the man had entered, upon seeing the Buddha, it seemed that he immediately developed a deep sense of faith. Then the Buddha recited this particular verse to him, and he thereby attained the spiritual fruit of a noble one. Later on, this man, because his cart was completely filled with many valuable treasures, all of which were offerings for the monastic community. At that time, the Buddha recited this verse. This verse is not included in our commentary, but it appears in other sources. The meaning here is that the Buddha skillfully used a metaphor to explain the concept. For example, imagine there is a particularly negligent and inattentive fool, and this fool is riding in his carriage, traveling along the main road, which is now designated as the National Road. This route in a previous era used to be called the Royal Road, but today it's called by more functional names like National Highway 318, 317, and so on. You see, there are several different types of national roads. He made the choice to abandon the main road, deciding not to take it. Instead, he took another road, one filled with sharp thorns and jagged stones, a road that was certainly not smooth at all, a very, very dangerous road. He drove on to this specific road, and once he was actually on this road, just as we mentioned a little bit earlier, the wheels and the carriage unfortunately broke down. After the carriage broke down, he felt very frustrated and distressed inside. The terrible fire of his affliction truly began to burn deep within him. And so this is explained in more detail through the use of a metaphor. Actually, this also happens in real life. For example, take someone driving a car. If he doesn't drive well, in the end, he unfortunately takes the wrong road and goes completely the wrong way. Nowadays, with so many navigation systems available, the situation is a bit better. But back in the past, if you made just one wrong turn, it was genuinely very difficult. So what does this metaphor mean? It refers to a fool, someone who is careless and negligent, just like the person who failed at driving earlier. This is a metaphor for a fool. This act of driving is used as an analogy for our practice of the Dharma. If we drive well, with care and attention, we will surely reach our destination. But if we don't drive well, becoming careless, we will actually go off course and fail to arrive. It could put our own life and wealth in a certain amount of very real danger. This is essentially the explanation from the perspective of a metaphor. Next, the third verse explains it from the perspective of meaning. In the same way, abandoning the true Dharma and following unwholesome actions, the fool is ultimately controlled by the Lord of Death, much like a broken wheel that has been utterly and completely destroyed. Regarding this subject, I do recall that later sections of the Udāna Varga also contain relevant passages. The essential meaning conveyed is that individuals who are exceptionally greedy find great enjoyment indulging in the pleasures that stem from that greed, and they do so with a profound sense of heedlessness. Later, they break their precepts, and after breaking the precepts, the enlightened Buddha spoke to the people gathered there at that moment, explaining that it is much like a merchant who deliberately does not take the correct and safe path, but instead chooses to travel down a wrong and dangerous road. If he takes a dangerous road, in the end, he deeply regrets it. It's the same principle. If you lack right understanding and right mindfulness from the start, and do not guard your own continuum with a mind of diligence, as a result you break this precept. And if you then choose to proceed down such a truly dangerous and evil path, what options are really left for you at that point? Whether you find yourself suffering in immense pain and deep sorrow, or you shed so many tears that they flow like a river, absolutely none of it will be of any real use to you in the end. So, as someone who has truly broken the precepts and as someone who is also negligent, even if a number of Tathagatas equal to the countless sands of the Ganges were to appear, even if these compassionate Buddhas manifest in person, they would still be utterly powerless to save you from this situation. And so, after the Buddha had carefully and thoroughly explained these important principles, many monks feel very regretful about some of their actions. Some of them, in fact, may not have committed offenses that would be considered particularly serious in nature, but those who had committed some, or were close to committing them, all felt especially remorseful. They began to confess and also continued to practice the Dharma. Later, through their diligent efforts, they finally attained the fruits of sainthood. And for this reason, within other sutras, one can also find many similar accounts. The meaning is that the previous example was a metaphor for someone who failed to drive successfully. Next, abandoning the true Dharma is the same. As mentioned earlier, abandoning the right path is very dangerous. The very same principle applies. You see, some of us, lacking the right kind of understanding and consistent mindfulness, can become quite negligent. This is true whether we are relying on our own karma or failing to apply antidotes and abandoning the true Dharma, especially those teachings that are particularly profound and related to virtuous minds and liberation. If we abandon the true Dharma, and then, following bad friends and their own negative intentions, they begin to engage in various unwholesome actions. There are many different kinds of unwholesome actions in the world, and if that is indeed the case, then such foolish individuals in the end, due to their negligence, when the Lord of Death eventually begins to take control, they will be utterly ruined by themselves. All your faculties, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and so on, will be destroyed. When you are approaching death, except for those who have cultivated themselves spiritually, ordinary people would typically clutch their chests with both hands and break down in tears. Feelings of regret arise in the heart, crying out in anguish, wailing. There are many such reactions. So, just as mentioned earlier, an incompetent driver steering his carriage, and ultimately he drives it right off a cliff or off the side of the road. As a direct result, the wheels break completely and the axle is damaged as well. In this way, he encounters a multitude of inauspicious and unsatisfactory outcomes. Therefore, this very important principle can be much more clearly understood by considering it through a practical analogy, which illustrates that within our own daily lives we ought to have a certain kind of, yes, from the very beginning, we should maintain right understanding and mindfulness. Indeed, I think each and every one of us should be able to clearly see this. We also often see similar situations nowadays, that someone who used to be a very good practitioner, who could be considered a very successful driver, so to speak. But in the end, some monastics will eventually return to lay life, while some others may rely on other negative influences and develop wrong views in their minds. And after developing these profoundly wrong views, they unfortunately go on to slander the sacred Dharma and the Buddha. We can sometimes see this in short videos, featuring people who had previously relied on Mahayana spiritual teachers and even received empowerments for some supreme secret teachings. But a little later on, their actions and their behavior almost seem as if they don't acknowledge past and future lives at all. And in the presence of others, they feel particularly successful themselves. It could be that this is simply because they have some tainted wealth. There's a bit of that. But what is truly most valuable and meaningful for themselves? The three trainings of discipline, concentration, and wisdom are destroyed, and nothing can be done. Many of these are simply the manifestation of karma. In our lives, it's not always the case that whatever you want to do, you can actually accomplish it all, because life is not such that whatever you wish for will definitely succeed. Many things are beyond our control. Many things are simply helpless. However, you continue to feel completely devoid of even the slightest hint of shame or any sense of guilt, and even in front of others, you still hold the unwavering belief that you were destined from birth to be a king for your entire life. Extremely successful and arrogant. If you go around boasting like this, it's like the bystanders see clearly while those involved are confused. So sometimes it really seems like, wow. In a certain sense, maybe he has his own set of rules and values that are misguided or even heretical. If that's the case, that's another matter entirely. There's nothing we can say about that. But it is a fact that some people will knowingly break their own vows and precepts. Despite this, they will still, when they are in front of everyone, conduct themselves with a particular arrogance, as if they genuinely believe they are something truly special. This particular kind of attitude and tone actually leads to a lot of gossip and criticism behind their backs. However, the people who are actually around them for certain purposes may still shower them with praise. Because of this, they become smug and self-satisfied. This phenomenon does exist, though it's very rare. But for a truly genuine person who used to be very good, we're just talking about spiritual practice here, not other aspects. For example, someone who used to be a particularly successful entrepreneur, but later on they might eventually find themselves with nowhere to turn, feeling completely at the end of their rope. Such situations as these definitely do exist. But these people are not arrogant either. Even later on, they continue to remain very genuine. They do speak the truth about themselves. They possess genuine self-knowledge. This kind of situation does exist, especially for all of us. Once all of the particularly favorable circumstances of our own modern era have finally been depleted, we should also be aware, is a reflection of what kind of life we have lived. This is something we really should figure out. It's also quite important. In this context, it actually means that some people, for example, let's consider an individual who is profoundly unsuccessful at the task of driving and, as a direct result, ends up driving their car into an abyss. Incredibly, they still think very highly of themselves, firmly believing their driving skills are exceptional. People might not say anything to their face, because nowadays people care a lot about saving face. But in reality, the actions they have taken are certainly nothing to be proud of or brag about. This is a point that everyone should understand. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about if a person abandons what should be done and instead engages in what should not be done and is negligent and arrogant, then their defilements will surely increase. This story is said to have occurred in the past in the city of Rajagriha. Devadatta came to rely on a teacher named Dashali Kashyapa. It is important to clarify that this Dashali Kashyapa is not the same individual as the well-known Venerable Kashyapa. Through this association, Devadatta gained a certain level of meditative concentration. According to accounts in other scriptures, it is said that initially, because of a number of Devadatta's specific actions, a great many of the monks decided to completely ignore him. After some time had passed, Ananda began to feel a certain amount of pity for him, because the two of them were relatives, after all. Although Ananda had not yet attained the fruit of arhatship, he did indeed have some worldly instructions concerning the 4 mundane dhyanas. So he taught him the key points of the 4 dhyanas. Devadatta was very intelligent and later gained supernatural powers through the 4 dhyanas. But whether it was from Ananda or Dashali Kashyapa just mentioned, he attained supernatural powers and miraculous abilities in front of them. After gaining these miraculous abilities, he deliberately went to King Ajatashatru. King Ajatashatru is also known as King Unborn Grudge. When he arrived at King Unborn Grudge, he first displayed some supernatural powers so that King Ajatashatru would develop faith in Devadatta. After he gained his trust, he began to sow discord. During this time, he was responsible for causing a major schism within the monastic community, the Sangha, and even committed the grave offense of drawing blood from the Buddha's body. He also let loose mad elephants and so on, and committed many unlawful acts. Later on, when the Buddha eventually learned of this situation, he spoke this verse. The meaning is that those individuals who are consistently negligent and arrogant can only serve to increase their own personal afflictions. Other than this particular point, there is truly not much of a deeper or more complex meaning to be found. If a person abandons what should be done, if someone, due to negligence, lacks right understanding and right mindfulness, and gives up what should be done, what is it that should be done? It is to contemplate and practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness and cultivate pure dharma. These are precisely the kinds of things that absolutely should be done, but unfortunately all of these necessary things have been abandoned. This mainly refers to the essential meaning of being vigilant. Engaging in what should not be done, what does he start doing? He starts doing the things that should not be done. He disrupts the monastic community, sheds the Buddha's blood, or neglects what should be done, such as listening, contemplating, and practicing the Dharma. And then as for what should not be done, for example, breaking discipline, disrupting the Sangha, and participating in a wide variety of completely inappropriate behaviors, he then starts to do these things. So what is this? It is negligence and arrogance. On one hand, he is especially lacking in diligence. He doesn't apply any antidotes and listens to no one. He lets himself go and is heedless at will. Moreover, it is clear that he has neither correct views nor proper conduct. He is also a particularly arrogant individual. So, what will inevitably increase in a person of this nature? The seeds of afflictions, and the afflictions themselves are contamination. As for contamination, asrava, we all know there are different ways of explaining it in the Abhidharmakosha. Sometimes afflictions that increase due to causes and conditions are called contamination. Sometimes it is precisely because of the very intricate connection with what are known as the 6 sense doors. This combination with the 6 contaminated sense doors is also called contaminated dharmas. Afflicted sentient beings also possess contaminated dharmas, as found in some Mahayana sutras and treatises. Cognitive obscurations are also called contamination. Also, there are the leaks of sentient beings. Generally speaking, in the Hinayana tradition, after all contamination is completely exhausted, one attains the highest supernatural powers and achieves the true fruit of arhatship. There are different explanations for this contamination. So in the end, what actually increases? Defilements increase. Those that had already ceased in one's own continuum begin to arise again, and those that exist will continue to grow more and more. In this way, a person cannot attain genuine happiness. Therefore, it is also stated in the Sutra of Golden Light, covered by ignorance and delusion, arrogant and negligent. Due to greed, anger, and ignorance, all kinds of evil are committed. The meaning of greed, anger, and ignorance is precisely greed, hatred, and delusion. Because of greed, anger, and ignorance, all kinds of evil are committed. This means that this is because one's own mental continuum is obscured by fundamental ignorance. As a result, there is negligence and arrogance. With these, one will almost certainly go on to commit negative actions out of greed, anger, and ignorance. There is nothing more to say about this. So, in a general sense, if we are to follow the particular perspective of this specific scripture, those who are especially negligent are rather ignorant. Everyone must be aware of this. If you see someone who is especially negligent in body, speech, and mind, spending all day eating, drinking, and seeking pleasure, such a person is, by nature, rather ignorant. Unless in what are considered very rare and exceptional cases, an individual is truly manifesting the outward appearance of a bodhisattva, engaging in various yogic practices and ascetic disciplines in front of others, they may have special reasons and hidden intentions for doing so. That is a different matter altogether. But generally speaking, a person who is arrogant is also rather ignorant. Whether it's eating, walking, or talking, if someone is always extremely arrogant at any time, such a person is also rather ignorant. And then, if someone never tries to correct themselves day after day, this kind of person is also a fool, but they don't realize it themselves, because arrogance and negligence are things that many people find hard to notice. For example, with anger, others can see it, and you yourself are basically aware of it too. Oh, today I feel really embarrassed. I lost my temper. You have that kind of feeling. But with arrogance, you think you're completely normal. Yet in front of others, you're actually very arrogant. We can see this happening on a truly international scale, including, for instance, in the United States and among other world leaders, based on their conversations and the general tone. It's clear that they are, very arrogant, as if they don't take others seriously at all. Even some practitioners are arrogant and negligent too. So people who are negligent and arrogant like this, in reality they don't do what they should and do what they shouldn't, just like Devadatta. Devadatta also had several reasons for his arrogance. One was that he was the Buddha's brother, and he was arrogant about that. Another point was that he was exceptionally intelligent. He could recite many of the Tripitaka scriptures backwards and possessed an excellent memory. Furthermore, he was also particularly clever. He often managed interpersonal relationships very well, especially when it came to sowing discord. He would speak human words to humans and ghost words to ghosts. Perhaps it's not quite appropriate to say it this way, but Devadatta was. In the Lotus Sutra, it is written that he was considered an incarnation of a bodhisattva. Therefore, from our contemporary perspective, it's evident that some people are genuinely and exceptionally skilled at socializing. In that case, maybe there are also some things going on beneath the surface. So, for this reason, it is said that truly arrogant and negligent people don't do what they are supposed to do, and end up doing things they shouldn't do. If that's the case, the afflictions within your mental continuum, the afflictions belonging to the truth of suffering's origin, will increase. The profound wisdom associated with the truth of cessation will, over time, gradually be extinguished. This means that it will no longer continue to increase. The following verse is essentially the complete opposite of this, isn't it? When you are experiencing a headache, is drinking milk good or bad? Have you studied medicine, Tibetan medicine?
라라도 지금 차가 시우다는 거서 오늘 라라도 차가 지가 잼 시우다는 거. 이때 지금 시우다도 어떤 거서 기술입니다. 양지 그렇게 당에 들어와서 거는 저 오만 도는 거 판단만 판제나 저거.
To know what you know and to admit what you don't know.
가상다리. Das ganze Maschine, die man sich gesagt hat, sei ja nicht in Rot. Sie haben eine Maschine, das die Schirko se John. Die mo in die Dari, der Jihazin. Da ja, da checkes man Maschine sagt, in die Marke von Montangar, da kann ganz am Pendiot.
If contamination increases, the uncontaminated path will be far away. If a person is mindful of their body and constantly practices virtuous deeds, if you lose this recollection mentioned earlier, namely the recollection of the 3 jewels mentioned in Nagarjuna's letter to a friend, recollection of morality, recollection of generosity, recollection of the devas, the 6 recollections. The 6 recollections are what every practitioner should cultivate. If you lose these, the previous non-negligence, and all of those things will be completely gone, and you will become arrogant again. In that case, the faults of afflictions in your mental continuum will increase day and night. At first, you might not even notice it yourself. Ultimately, in the very end, you will also inevitably find yourself controlled by your own inner afflictions. Then, uncontaminated wisdom refers to what we call the wisdom of liberation, and the merits related to the three trainings will become more and more distant from you. Eventually, in your own mental continuum, they may completely disappear. This is something that can certainly happen. On the other hand, regarding this particular case, at that specific time, there weren't many such cases. Maudgalyayana and Shariputra, on that very day, those individuals who had separated due to Devadatta and caused a schism within the Sangha were reconciled. Maudgalyayana and the others successfully reunited the entire monastic community. Later, the Buddha, in response to this matter, spoke this verse. As we have previously pointed out, if a person truly and consistently relies on the valuable techniques of mind training, mindful of their body refers to mindfulness of the body. If one diligently practices mindfulness of the body, one will find that they truly constantly engage in virtuous actions. The meaning here is that the first two lines mainly say that if you are negligent and do not practice diligently, the afflictions in your mental continuum will only increase, and virtue will become more and more distant from you. In the end, you will become just an ordinary person, or even transform into what we might call a bad person, and this is a very real possibility. Then, on the other hand, the text presents a contrast, saying if that person is truly wise, he will often rely on right awareness and mindfulness to practice mindfulness of the body. Now, if a person consistently practices the art of mindfulness of the body, there is mindfulness of the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena, the four foundations of mindfulness. Here the term body serves as a representative for the practice. In fact, the other three foundations of mindfulness are also being practiced. This is because within the direct experience of the body, all these foundations are already included and can be observed. The six consciousnesses, the six sensations, and the six dharmas. The six dharmas can be understood in two different ways. One way is as the sensory objects of form, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Another way is as dharmas that are related to one's own consciousness. Perhaps, as mentioned in Gateway to Knowledge, in this context, the meaning of dharma here might be a little different. Therefore, we contemplate the body as impure, feelings as a form of suffering, the mind as impermanent, and phenomena as non-self. These are present in our usual practice of the four foundations of mindfulness. So, if we practice in this way, our cultivation will be successful. Moreover, we are constantly cultivating these wholesome qualities. If we consistently practice these wholesome qualities, the afflictions in our own mental continuum will gradually diminish. This requires long-term practice. One is to practice respectfully and persistently over the long term. We speak of constant diligence and respectful diligence. Constant diligence is very important. Everyone can be diligent for a day or two. At the beginning, we are all very diligent. We ask everyone to keep a journal. I believe you can definitely keep it up for 2 or 3 days. You can certainly keep it up for 2 or 3 months. But whether you can persist in the long term is hard to say. Some people have perseverance. Whatever they do, they are consistent in their approach. There won't be much significant change. Some people get excited at first when they hear about it and immediately start doing it. But gradually this enthusiasm fades away. This kind of situation happens. So it's important to be diligent consistently. Maintaining constant diligence is also a very important matter. For example, recalling a story from the past, I think it was about Master Lianqi, is that right? Master Lianqi from the Ming dynasty. He always made vows himself. He once explained that for a full 30 years he had never lain down in a bed to sleep at night, as he had made a solemn vow to himself. True to his word, he genuinely fulfilled this difficult commitment. He also shared that his daily spiritual cultivation included reciting the Buddha's name 50,000 times each and every day. No matter where you are in the world, there are always people who are extremely diligent. But on the other hand, if we are lazy, then, whether it's worldly or spiritual matters, nothing can be accomplished. In the past, the Jataka stories of the Bodhisattva also mention this. If you are lazy at home, you won't even be able to obtain clothing or 3 meals a day. A monastic who is lazy cannot be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. This is also stated in the Buddhist scriptures. Therefore, among all the practices for self-improvement, laziness is like a significant enemy to us. It causes us great harm, hindering our progress, so we must diligently cultivate ourselves.
So, on
the other hand, the complete opposite of what has just been mentioned is that one should not do what should not be done, and one should always do what should be done. With right understanding and right mindfulness, all contamination can ultimately be eliminated. It seems there isn't a story or case about this either. The intended meaning here is that as a practitioner, as was already mentioned earlier, regarding the 4 foundations of mindfulness, mindfulness of the body, feelings, and so on, do what should be done and refrain from doing what should not be done. Negligence, killing, stealing, and lying, etc. Many improper actions, both worldly and spiritual. Many things that are not in accordance with the Dharma. We should not do things that should not be done. This includes monastics as well. What are the things that monastics should do? And what are the things that they should not do? The 17 Matters discusses this. Some are prohibitions, others prescriptions. We should do what ought to be done. Refrain from doing what should not be done. What should we do? We should consistently engage in what is right and practice virtuous deeds. Among the practices of virtuous deeds, for example, in the Mahayana tradition, we generate bodhicitta and benefit sentient beings. It is absolutely essential to recognize this is a matter of great importance for us as well. And if we can genuinely develop this kind of motivation deep within our hearts, then, to some extent, we will do some good deeds in our lives. But if we lack this motivation in our hearts, then many of our actions may often end up being improper or unwholesome. Here, it says to possess correct awareness and mindfulness. As for correct awareness, it's a bit different from the correct awareness described in the Bodhicaryavatara, the way of the Bodhisattva. In the commentary, it's explained that correct awareness means realizing with undistorted wisdom. Correct awareness here simply means using undistorted wisdom to truly understand all phenomena. This is what is called correct awareness. As for correct mindfulness, it means abiding in a virtuous state of mind. The Bodhicaryavatara's awareness and mindfulness differ here. See the commentary for details. Therefore, with awareness and mindfulness, with undistorted wisdom and stabilized wisdom, whether it's the wisdom and compassion we often talk about, by employing the meditative methods of profound insight and tranquil calm abiding, all of the various contaminated afflictions and mental defilements can be thoroughly and completely eliminated. So this very particular kind of phenomenon, this is a principle that we should also be able to apply in our own lives. And yes, it's true that all things considered contaminated can, in fact, be completely and thoroughly eliminated. All right, let's just go ahead and stop here for the time being.
Udāna Sūtra L16